The Weeknd has become the first artist to ever reach 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify, arguably now making him the biggest artist in the world. His career started over a decade ago, just playing small shows in basements in Toronto, making music while surfing on friends' sofas, to now being the biggest star in music and selling out worldwide stadium tours. Welcome back to Culture Shock. I am your host Sam Land, and in this episode of Deep Dive we're going to be going into The Weeknd, the biggest artist of our generation. There's currently some fireworks going off. Let's hope that doesn't impact the recording too much. So how did The Weeknd go from this anonymous artist just posting music online to the biggest star on the planet? Abel Tesfaye, the man behind The Weeknd, started making music in 2009. Eventually in 2010 he met producer Jeremy Rose, and the two would put out 3 songs together onto YouTube. Those tracks being What You Need, Loft Music and The Party and The After Party. At this point The Weeknd was keeping his identity anonymous, but the tracks began to gain viral attention pretty quickly and surged after Drake shared them on a blog post. There's stories of Abel still working his job at American Apparel while his co-workers would be listening to his music, not knowing it was him. In 2011, Abel and then his 2 new associates, Sal and Cash, would set up EXO, The Weeknd's current label, and immediately began work on The Weeknd's debut project, House of Balloons. House of Balloons would be posted online and quickly gained a lot of attention and included the 3 singles that The Weeknd and Jeremy Rose had worked on before. However, Jeremy Rose wasn't credited as a producer. House of Balloons continued to blow up over 2011, and Weeknd quickly followed them up with 2 new mixtapes, Thursday and Echoes of Silence. These gained a lot of attention online but featured some uncleared samples, so was never able to be released officially. As he began to gain more traction, The Weeknd performed his first ever show at the Mod Club in Toronto, where he would go on to meet Drake. The Weeknd and Drake would work together on a number of tracks for Drake's upcoming Take Care record, including The Weeknd featuring on Crew Love. Following his co-sign from Drake in 2011, more eyes were on The Weeknd, and he was able to embark on a few small shows, including some international festival dates, including Wireless here in the UK. In November 2012, on the EXO label, Trilogy would be released, a reworked, remastered version of the 3 debut mixtapes that put The Weeknd onto the map in the first place. And Jeremy Rose was now officially credited as a producer on the 3 tracks he had worked on. It was received very positively and sold 86,000 in its first week and is now platinum certified. Following the release of Trilogy and a few more international festival dates, and obviously the co-sign from Drake, more eyes were now on The Weeknd, and a lot of fans wanted to know where would he go next, and it wouldn't take long for him to find out. In May 2013, The Weeknd officially announced Kissland, his second studio album. Initially scheduled to be released not soon after the initial title track was released as a single, it was pushed back until it was finally released in late 2013. Kissland was inspired by horror film scores and details The Weeknd as he adjusts to his newfound fame and attention, again being received very positively, selling 96,000 in its first week. At this point, The Weeknd was still a cult artist, but he had a few high-profile collaborations come in, such as a remix of Beyonce's Drunk in Love and the absolute banger that is Love Me Harder with Ariana Grande. Following the release of Kissland, he obviously went on tour. First he supported Justin Timberlake on his 2020 Experience tour and a headline tour entitled King of the Fall. And not soon after this tour, The Weeknd would already start the rollout for his next studio album. Following the conclusion of the King of the Fall tour, The Weeknd released 2 singles, Often and King of the Fall, the latter just being a standalone track, while the former was the lead single for The Weeknd's currently untitled next album. In May 2015, The Weeknd would officially announce Beauty Behind the Madness, with the first single, The Hills, being released, peaking at number 1 on the Billboard charts and becoming The Weeknd's first number 1 single. The Weeknd decided to follow up The Hills pretty quickly with the second single for Beauty Behind the Madness, Can't Feel My Face, again hitting number 1 and becoming a massive success for The Weeknd. Between the initial release of Kissland back in 2013 and Beauty Behind the Madness in middle of 2015, streaming music had really begun to take space, with Apple Music launching and The Weeknd and Drake as the 2 faces. Beauty Behind the Madness would eventually be released in August 2015 with over 400,000 equivalent first week album sales. A bit of a jump from the 96,000 from Trilogy and Kissland. And Beauty Behind the Madness established The Weeknd as a mainstream star. It proved that The Weeknd was capable of making pop music with a dark R&B edge. He supported Beauty Behind the Madness with a worldwide tour and his first ever set of festival headlines and arena shows. With Beauty Behind the Madness being such a success and the change in sound proving to be a mainstream hit, a lot of fans wondered what would The Weeknd's next project sound like, and it wouldn't take long for them to find out. Less than a year from Beauty Behind the Madness, the rollout for The Weeknd's next album, Starboy, would start. Following the release of Beauty Behind the Madness, The Weeknd would work on some high-profile collaborations, including FML with Kanye West and featuring on Beyoncé's Lemonade album, before officially announcing his next album, Starboy, in September of 2016. The first single, again another title track, was worked on with French music pioneers Daft Punk, becoming a massive success and The Weeknd's third #1 hit, before following up with another Daft Punk assisted track, I Feel It Coming. The two lead singles were a complete step away from the music that was being made on Kissland and Beauty Behind the Madness, and featured more dance and pop elements than ever before. Starboy was released in November 2016, becoming another #1 project for The Weeknd and selling 350,000 units in its first week. Starboy featured a number of high-profile collaborations, including Future, Lana Del Rey and Kendrick Lamar. Like his albums before, The Weeknd supported Starboy with a worldwide tour, this time taking place throughout pretty much the entirety of 2017. The Weeknd was now a megastar, and this began to take its toll on not only him but the relationships he'd have with other people. And in March of 2018 we'd get a short 6-song EP entitled My Dear Melancholy. This sees Abel go back to his dark roots that was initially found on the trilogy set of mixtapes, with the lead single Call Out My Name becoming a #1 hit and another massive success for The Weeknd, eventually closing this era of The Weeknd with a headline set at the legendary Coachella Festival. Following the success of Starboy and My Dear Melancholy, The Weeknd spent the majority of 2018 and 2019 quiet, doing very few shows and very few guest appearances. In late 2019, rumblings started to happen of a new Weeknd album quickly approaching, with a new single being teased in a Mercedes-Benz advert before the lead single for his next album, Heartless, was released in late 2019. It was The Weeknd's next #1 single, and just a few days later he would release the biggest track he would ever release, Blinding Lights. There's not a lot I can say about Blinding Lights that hasn't been said already. It's one of the biggest songs of all time, spending over 90 weeks on the Billboard Hot 100, obviously peaking at #1 and becoming one of the biggest tracks of all time. In February 2020, Abel would announce his next album, After Hours, to be released in March of 2020, along with the title track, After Hours, and a performance on SNL. Even before its release, After Hours was set up to be one of the best performing albums of 2020, with it becoming Apple Music's most pre-saved album of all time, and every track from the album charted in the first week. Due to a variety of reasons, artists in 2020 delayed a lot of their releases, so After Hours, being one of the first major releases from the pandemic era, stayed in the public conscious and public streaming for quite a long time. But despite the commercial and critical reception the album received, the Grammys refused to nominate it for any categories, and Abel took this as an attack and refused to nominate any more music forward. As 2020 and 2021 went on, The Weeknd would only get bigger, with remixes of Save Your Tears with Ariana Grande and In Your Eyes with Doja Cat becoming massive singles for The Weeknd. And it was eventually announced that The Weeknd would be headlining the Super Bowl halftime performance at Super Bowl 2021. Much of 2021 for The Weeknd was spent promoting the 10-year anniversary of his debut mixtape, House of Balloons, Echoes of Silence and Thursday. He did have a tour scheduled for After Hours, but unfortunately due to the ongoing pandemic, this was cancelled outright. In August of 2021, The Weeknd released what seemed to be a standalone single with Take My Breath. In my opinion, a really underrated Weeknd track. I'm a massive fan of this song, and I think it should have been one of his bigger hits. Toward the back end of 2021, in a couple of interviews, The Weeknd did say that his next album was ready to go, and in January 2022, less than a week into the year, The Weeknd would release his, as of recording, latest studio album, Dawn FM. Dawn FM would be another commercial success for The Weeknd. However, it's his first album in quite a while to have not hit #1. Due to a new rule by Billboard, it only hit #2 because the physical versions of the record weren't available to be shipped on the first week. However, it did really well streaming numbers and continued to build on the world that The Weeknd developed in After Hours, and all 24 tracks from the record did chart in its first week. During the rollout and promotion of Dawn FM, The Weeknd teased that it was another trilogy that they were in the process of, with After Hours starting, Dawn FM as the second album, and presumably Afterlife as the third record, setting up the trilogy to be After Hours as The Weeknd partying in Vegas, eventually passing away, Dawn FM being Purgatory, and then Afterlife obviously being Death. The cancelled After Hours tour was renamed the After Hours Till Dawn Stadium Tour, moving obviously from arenas to stadiums. The tour kicked off in America, being a complete sellout for every single show, with extra dates added to many cities and new shows added to the rest of the world for the following year. Following the release of Dawn FM, The Weeknd replaced Kanye West at Coachella 2022, stepping in with less than 2 weeks' notice and performing an incredible headline set alongside Swedish House Mafia, who would also work on a track with called Moth to a Flame. This leads us to today. With the conclusion of his American tour and Europe and the rest of the world coming very, very soon, The Weeknd now sits as the biggest artist on the planet. With over 100 million monthly listeners, there's no one else even coming close, and a sold-out stadium tour means that plenty of people will have the chance to witness The Weeknd live. As of recording, he's also just released his first live album, live at SoFi, from his American tour last year, and he has stated many a time that this is going to be the final piece of the Dawn FM chapter, which means that we could be seeing a new album very soon, perhaps even before the European tour kicks off. It's hard to see The Weeknd getting smaller from this point. The Weeknd has seen success that very few artists have seen in the music industry, and if he continues to grow how he is now, he'll surely become the biggest artist the planet has ever seen. Thank you for watching this video. This has been Culture Shock. I've been your host Sam Land, and this has been a deep dive into Abel Tesfaye, aka The Weeknd.